Good morning. I am Deb, and my pronouns are she and her. I have been to workshops and training sessions, and I'm going to try to do better. So, in our quest to ever be welcoming, I'm gonna try to make this my new habit, and I invite you as well to make it yours. I'm Deb, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm Deb, and see, I'm messing my routine now. I gotta get in the whole flow of the thing again, but it'll come. Welcome to Woodside. Welcome to worship. It's always good to gather. I love that we do this every week. Whoever decided that weekly was a good idea, that was great. So thank you. And there's been a lot going on, and I missed you last week, and I'm glad to be back. So. I'm glad you're here. Welcome. There are things to keep in mind as we worship this morning. One of them is that we have received word that Patty Pagel's mother died yesterday, and she was almost 98 years old. And so Patty's doing okay, but appreciates that she has the love and support of this community, and she will keep us posted on whatever arrangements. And that may be the only thing I know for our prayer list this morning, but you probably know other things, and we can name them when we get to that time. So, regarding our worship itself this morning, we have a song that has one verse. So, don't think you're going to get out early, though. We're going to sing it multiple times. So. Do we need to go over it?
I probably do, but not. We'll sing it. Warning. We'll sing it at least twice, maybe 3 times.
We'll see how the Spirit moves Tom over there. And if Tom quits playing and you want to sing it again, just keep going, and the rest of us will join in.
Yeah, it's a good song.
It is a good song. Also. I want to remind us all that when we get to the time in the worship when we share the meal of Holy Communion, that is a meal for all of us, all of God's people. Anybody that wants to be part of a meal of grace and spirit community, feel free to come and eat. It is gluten-free bread. It is alcohol-free wine. It will show up at the moment we need it most, and you're welcome to come and be part of that meal. I don't know of any other announcements this morning that will get us going together. We save other kinds of stuff for after worship, so we'll get to all that. But for now, welcome. We say it every week, and it is such a refreshing thing to say, to hear. Whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome at Woodside Church. So I want you to stand and join me in our call to worship. God waits for our praise. God of our hope is life for the entire world.
God's faithfulness calls forth songs of passion from the ends of the earth.
God formed the mountains and stills the roaring seas.
God calms the uproar of the nations.
God cares for the land, blesses it with water, fills it with grain to feed the people.
Let creation shout and sing for joy.
Let us pray. We give you thanks, O God, for all the ways that you bless our lives, especially your Spirit that graces our worship. Let us dream your dreams and see visions of the world as you created it to be. Bring us closer to you so that we might do your will and dwell in your house forever. Amen.
Let's worship together with our first song. As we gather at your table, as we live listen to your word. Help us know, God, our presence, let our hearts and minds be stirred. Nourish us with sacred story till we claim it as our own. Reach us through this holy banquet, and make our victory known. Turn our worship into witness. For you love and serve Gracious Spirit, help us You may be seated.
A reading from Jeremiah. Jeremiah sent a letter from Jerusalem to Babylon to the surviving elders among the exiles, to the priests, the prophets, and all other people Nebuchadnezzar had deported. Thus says God omnipotent, the God of Israel, to all the exiles I deported from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses to live in, plant gardens to eat what they grow, and eat what they grow. Marry and raise daughters and sons. Find wives for your sons and husbands for your daughters, that they may bear daughters and sons. Multiply while you are there. Do not decrease. Rather, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city to which I exiled you. Pray to God for it. For if it prospers, you will prosper. This ends the reading.
Reading from Luke. On the journey of Jerusalem, Jesus passed along the borders of Samaria and Galilee. As Jesus was entering a village, 10 people with leprosy met him. Keeping their distance, they raised their voices and said, "Jesus, Rabbi, have pity on us." When Jesus saw them, he reported, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." As they were going, they were healed. One of them, realizing that what had happened, came back, praising God in a loud voice, then fell down at the feet of Jesus and spoke his praises. The individual was a Samaritan. Jesus replied, "Weren't all 10 made whole? Were all the other 9? Was there no one to return and give thanks except his foreigner?" Then Jesus said to the Samaritan, "Stand up and go your way. Your faith has saved you." This ends the reading.
I just realized yesterday that it is October, and I have not yet preached any sermons related to football. So let's start there, shall we? In fact, let's start with South Carolina, which unranked, and after a bit of a slow season start, went to Athens to face number 3 Georgia and won by a field goal in overtime. If you don't mind celebrating just a minute with me, I really appreciate that. Rock, rock. You Michigan fans are perhaps feeling a little bit of the same thing. Marched into Champaign and beat Illinois in their own house. You're taking away my microphone because I talked about South Carolina? I'm sorry that it was not a feat that Michigan State could also pull off. Wisconsin ruled Madison yesterday, and the Spartans are quite possibly still on a bus somewhere, taking the very long way back to East Lansing, contemplating 38 detours on the way. There's supposed to be something about a home field advantage. Wisconsin was probably a good guess against Michigan State even without the home field advantage, but Georgia should have won that game, much as it pains me to say so. I'm not telling you this because I actually watched any of those games. I was in Kalamazoo all weekend at the annual meeting of the Michigan Conference United Church of Christ. I didn't even look at the highlights or check scores on my phone. But I find myself pondering home field advantage. And it made me think of Psalm 137, which may be more familiar in the reggae version. By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, there we wept when we remembered Zion. For the wicked carried us away in captivity, required from us a song. But how can we sing our holy song in a strange land? How can we be ourselves? How can we bring our best gifts? How can we live our best life? How can we do what we do when everything is so unfamiliar and hostile and the crowds are jeering and you left home without your lucky t-shirt and even the Gatorade is the wrong flavor? How can we be at home in someone else's home? It sucks to be from out of town sometimes. It especially sucks when you did not choose this place or this situation and you miss home so dreadfully. You don't fit in, so you sit by the river and cry, even if it's not the right river and home is so far away. If you can feel that, then you can probably feel Jeremiah today, and perhaps Jesus too. For Jeremiah, the people had been taken into exile, lifted from Jerusalem by the conquering Babylonian army of King Nebuchadnezzar, forced to live for a generation in a place they didn't choose and don't particularly like. They missed Jerusalem, Zion, their holy city, the place where God is, plus good schools, vegan restaurants, and a reliable form of government by the people, etc. In Luke's gospel, 600 years later, Jesus was in a border town, traveling through an area where Samaritans and Jews lived in proximity, not really getting along exactly, not neighbors so much as cold warriors. The only place where Samaritans and Jews really cohabited was in the leper colony. People filled with people with a variety of skin ailments, all brought together by their shared ostracism. People living on the margins, in exile, in quarantine, people who just wanted to go home. And in each case, the outcast people get a divine answer. Be whole, be well, be home. This Jeremiah reading comprises snippets of letters between Jeremiah and the exiles, written early in the exile as folks were missing home and struggling to adjust. Jeremiah's word for them is this: this is your home, this is your new home. Get comfortable, buy a house or build one, start a business, get a job, plant a garden, subscribe to the community theater, get married, have kids and grandkids. This is home. For a people who have always identified as special, chosen people of God, the idea of making themselves at home in a strange place would, I would imagine, have seemed unfaithful. They wanted to have families, to grow into that great nation they believed was their destiny, but they had expected to do all that in Jerusalem. The land was the key to everything that God had promised. It was their home field advantage to do all that Jeremiah told them. But in a place far away from Judah was, well, untenable. It sucks to be from out of town. The story of the 10 lepers has mystified Christians ever since Jesus told it, I guess. Jesus is approached by 10 people with skin diseases, which were likely not what we know as leprosy, as Hansen's disease these days. He told them, go show themselves to the priest, and on the way they were healed. I have a book from my days as a camp counselor decades ago, a book of stories that reinterpret the gospel stories. It's called The Way of the Wolf. And I remembered it contained a short essay about the 10 lepers. More specifically, the essay was called Where Are the Nine? And it tries to answer Jesus' question. Tried to imagine why only one person healed of leprosy came back to say thank you. It isn't fair, really, to boil down the poetry of a story to a set of bullet points, but here's the beginning of the list of what the writer suggested. One of the 9 was too frightened by the whole experience to go back. One was offended because it was all just too easy. He thought he should have had to jump through more bigger hoops. One realized he didn't want to be made well after all. He didn't know how to live without leprosy because this had been his life for so long. One forgot because the joy was just so overwhelming. One had been reduced to begging for so long, forced to live off the few dollars people would hand out of their car windows, forced to feign an attitude of gratitude that he didn't really feel. All of this for so long, so enduring, that he just could not say thank you to anyone anymore for anything. You get the idea. People have been speculating forever about the missing 9. We could probably make up all kinds of things, assign all kinds of motives, good and bad, based on our understanding of human psychology and sociopathology. You could probably make up a few of your own, and they all make sense. But then, one preacher, Barbara Brown Taylor, I think, offers this. The 9 were being obedient. They were doing exactly what Jesus said, going to show themselves to the priest. So then the question of Jesus gets flipped on its head. Why wasn't the 10th going to see the priest? Why was the 10th being disobedient? If healing was the promised end result, wouldn't you at least want to follow directions? He started, we know that, the 10th man. It was on the way that he realized he was healed, and then he turned around. The thing is, there's a point to seeing the priest. Priests were the ones who had the power to announce that someone was healed, the power to restore them to community, the power to end the quarantine, the power to declare them clean and bring them home again. But Jesus makes a point to say that the one who came back was a Samaritan, a foreigner, he says, which means that no matter whether he was fresh as a peach, the priest was not going to restore him to community, because community was not the relationship between Jews and Samaritans. Right. The newly healed man was still unclean simply by virtue of being a Samaritan, healed of leprosy, but not part of this righteous group. Mm-hmm. The priest would have done nothing for him. So instead, he came back to Jesus and said, "Thank you." And Jesus said his faith made him whole. Mm-hmm. And don't we think it's interesting that it was only after he was healed that his being a Samaritan became a factor? Up until then, they were all outcast together. Sort of like people stranded on an island or on a plane that's about to crash or in some other crisis, all functioning as this well-trained team, even if they just met. But then the crisis is open, the doors open, and they all go back to their lives, back to their loyalties, back to their prejudices. Don't you wonder if the man missed his former outcasts, his former co-outcasts? Do you wonder if they ever missed him, thought about him? He belonged. until he was well, and then he didn't. One preacher commented it took 10 men. In Judaism, it took 10 men to form a legit synagogue. In their colony, they would have not been able to worship without a group of 10. So the 9 Jewish men needed the Samaritan to be their 10th. Kind of like a fourth for bridge or whatever. In the healing, then, they were free once again to live without him. Or worse, to arm themselves against him. How do you find home after that? And how do you live in the home that you make? Jesus said to the foreigner, "Go on your way." Or one translator said, "Having risen up, be going." Find home. Jeremiah said to the displaced people, don't plan to go anywhere. Plant, marry, build, join, settle in for the long haul. This is home. Or Stephen Still said, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. Different sermon. Jeremiah coached the people, called the people to create home in exile. He said they would be there at least a generation. And we remember that the last time that happened was 600 years earlier still, the 40 years they spent in the wilderness after they escaped from Egypt's slavery. We call those years, those 40 years, the wilderness years. One of my favorite Bible teachers called it the wilderness school. He talked about all the things that these newly freed people needed to learn about how to be a people, how to make sure everyone had what they needed, how not to hoard, how to take a day off, how to resist the ever-present desire to have power over each other. There was a lot they needed to know. And in this time of Babylonian captivity, maybe the people are needing a refresher. Maybe this is the exile school, a time of learning again how to dream what God dreams, how to desire what God desires, how to treat one another and the land and the animals as beloved creatures of God and not simply commodities for our own exploitation. Jeremiah describes the time in exile as if the people had been sent back to their rooms with no dinner. Now, you don't come out of there until what? Maybe until you understand why you got sent there in the first place, which is a heavy burden for a hungry child, a heavy burden for a feckless, faithless people. Maybe we, so modern folks, cannot groove with the idea of a God who would manipulate national relationships, a God who, for a wild example, would use Russia or Ukraine to ensure election of a tyrant to punish us for our short-sightedness or self-absorption. You like self-absorption so much, might say, God, I'll show you self-absorption. And then once arrived one Donald J. Trump. Maybe that's not our understanding of God. But maybe we could imagine there was value anyway. Here we are in a really awful situation. And some folks are telling us, this is not the first time it's been this awful. It's been awful for a very long time. It just hadn't touched you yet. So here we are in a really awful situation for white people. And it's worth asking ourselves how it happened. And then, how can we not let this happen again? At least that's what Jeremiah seems to be saying. Build yourself a house. And make sure it has a corner where you can keep a chair and a thinking cap ready at all times. And here's where the exile and the healing of 10 lepers overlap just a little. Our preacher at the annual meeting this weekend in Kalamazoo was Starsky Wilson, activist and organizer and powerful proclaimer from St. Louis, who insisted that in every bit of churchiness that we do, we ask ourselves, how are the children? Everything that we do as a church, he said, we should ask the question, how are the children? Among the very many other things that I will be ruminating about on the coming days, he called out our disobedience to the wrong things, our obedience to the wrong things, and challenged us to be disobedient. At least that's the way I heard it. He said this as a giant example. If the state budget is immoral, you have not been a faithful steward of the dollars you pay in taxes. We talk a lot about empire and resistance here at Woodside, and some of us are maybe sort of familiar with the high points of the state budget, but does it ever cross our minds to disobey? What instructions are we following to our detriment, or following even though it will make no difference at all? And beyond the state budget, what? I confess I do not always stop for the entire length of red lights. Especially on Sunday morning when there's virtually no traffic, or in a construction zone where opposing traffic is shut off by barricades. What's the point, I think? And then I continue on my way. I'm not sure, however, that is the kind of disobedience that is born of courageous conviction of following Jesus. It's more about my own impatience. So the question for me, where might my impatience be more productively applied? Perhaps lesson 1 in exile school is a reconsideration of obedience. To whom are we obedient, and at what cost? What rules are we following, and how is our rule following bringing us closer to the vision of God for a world that is healed? How is our obedience part of the problem? Or how is it simply pointless? Wasted energy that could be applied to something else? What misplaced obedience has landed these ancient people of Jerusalem, in exile in Babylon? How long was the Samaritan in that leper colony before he realized that obedience was beside the point? I'm not unsympathetic to those with a tendency to obey the people in charge. But I also think I'm beginning to understand just a little the minds of those who know from experience, who know from intuition, who know from stories the ancestors tell, who know that obedience to the powers, to the system, to the way it is, such obedience is useless, even counterproductive. So you turn and say thanks to the one who freed you before you quickly disappear into the ether, the only choice that makes sense, because following instructions and trotting over to the registration office will just get you dragged through all kinds of hoops before they ultimately tell you what they've told you all along. You don't matter. Even healed, you aren't good enough. Even cleared of any evidence of previous indiscretions, you still don't belong. We don't like your kind here. On the way to Kalamazoo for this annual meeting, I stopped to see Mark at Adrian Prison and Gabriel at Milan. Gabriel had news of court and family, and he just chats away, catching me up on everything. We, Woodside, sent him a book last week that he requested, A History of Puerto Rico, because he wants to learn about his heritage. And he was telling me all about that. He was very excited to read about Puerto Rico. And he'll be in court in December for a sentencing hearing and hopes to go home soon. He's been held 2 years already just to get to this point. Mark quizzed me about the Woodside photo that we sent. You remember back in the summer we took a picture of all of us gathered up here with an empty fax roll of paper spread out across as a banner, and we put a greeting in the banner and we sent it to all of our incarcerated guys. Mark had practically memorized it. Who's the new guy on the left holding the banner? Who is that standing beside Karen? Where's Cliff in this picture? I didn't see Cliff. And Joe, how is Joe after he hit that deer with his car? Now, mind you, Mark did not have the picture in his hands. That's not allowed. And I didn't have it with me because that's not allowed either. He was just doing this from memory and hoping I would too. And he asked me to give you all his love. Last week, we buried our beloved sister Jenny, baptized at age 87 in this community of faith. Jenny faced her death, held and comforted by this same community of faith. Encouraged, comforted by the love that she felt here. But before I left for those visits and meetings in Kalamazoo, we got a call in the church office from a woman afraid of losing her home. We get those a lot. And then I got a call from a man here in Flint, someone I had never met. He said he wanted to talk, he needed help. He said he had also been incarcerated, but now he's back, needing home, needing connection. He talked about church as a community that holds you up in the hard times. Maybe he was just talking as much as he thought he needed to get some groceries and a tank of gas. But I thought, too, that he needed to be held up by community. Maybe he'll come for worship someday. Maybe he'll find that loving support someplace. Home, community, a desire to belong, to be at home. It is a powerful pull. And it is constantly threatened. The carceral system continues to steal people from their homes, especially people of color, shooting them to death in their own homes or rehoming them in captive exile for as long as anyone can imagine, for as long as we continue to live by a dirty, filthy, rotten system. Refugees and immigrants are still searching for homes, still hearing the jeers and taunts of a nation caught in a particularly ugly mood, still detained at the border or returned to a country they've never known, still desired when it is convenient and tossed aside when it is not. Bank profits are rising again and foreclosures threaten, no doubt a sign that people are losing their security, losing their homes, and shortly losing their minds with fear. The global water crisis is making it harder for people to find, making home harder to find for people and for wildlife. And wildfire season has begun again, destroying homes and habitats. And this time, the power company in California is proactively shutting off power to people's homes, a practice that predictably has a more painful impact on people with the least ability to buy fuel and a generator. The planet, our common, irreplaceable home, is groaning under the weight of 8 billion people, 8 billion people, most of them at risk and deprived, and 20 billion animals, most of them crushed into confined feeding operations where they suffer for short lives, create massive environmental ick, and die horrible deaths. The rivers, oceans, skies, rainforests, wetlands, glaciers, all the things of our planet home are compromised and fading away. We are in exile. Scripture uses the language of resident aliens to describe the people of God living under an occupying force. That is us, as a rule, as people of faith. Not of this world, we say, with more or less conviction. Resident aliens theologically, but these days, don't we also feel like political exiles from the home we thought we knew? Living under the Nebuchadnezzar of the Oval Office, whose lies and crimes mount daily, whose attorneys and advocates tossed their scruples to the wind ages ago, whose children enrich themselves by exploitation of workers and foreign powers, whose lieutenants run for cover or resign for fear of being implicated in his self-dealing as national policy. Don't we feel like exiles? We are not a theocracy, and I don't want us to be a theocracy, but I do want to know where home is. And Jeremiah says, this is it. So we read again verse 7, and I find myself uncomfortable and annoyed. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, says God, says Jeremiah, and pray on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. If it prospers, you will prosper. Babylon? Pray for the well-being of this god-awful administration. Pray that they will prosper. The Trump regime. Shall I also pray for the well-being of the GOP and Mitch McConnell? Perhaps I'm a little too far gone here, no longer clinging to faith, but I'm having a hard time imagining that. Is that the lesson of the exile, that we should wish Trump well? And where in God's name is home? There's Babylon, the empire that is sucking the life from us. Then there's Woodside, newly at home in a neighborhood we once knew, in a city, Flint, for which we surely do pray. How can we be ourselves? How can we bring our best gifts? How can we live our best life? How can we do what we do when we left home without our hymnals and pipe organ, and I can't find the box with the book lights for the Good Friday service, and we need more closet space, and even the Gatorade is the wrong flavor? How can we be at home when everything is unfamiliar and hostile, and an anonymous neighbor is mad at us, and a mural is causing a fuss? How can we be at home in someone else's home? And how can we entice the towns and villages of Genesee County to care about the well-being of Flint, the city that is at its heartbeat? How can we somehow convince Flushing and Davison and Fenton and Grand Blanc and the rest that they do better when Flint is whole and well? We will figure it out. We will have to figure it all out. In a couple of weeks, we'll consecrate this new church building, dedicating it to the work of God's reign of justice and equity. The theme for that day has been chosen by our preacher, Campbell Lovett, our conference minister. The theme is the House of Woodside, which sounds grand and settled and important. And next week, our board will spend the weekend on retreat together to begin to figure out what that means in this moment, in this place. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, says God, says Jeremiah, and pray on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. And somehow we will. We will be Jesus' people, God's partners, finding ways to make the world whole. Disobeying instructions from time to time, I would imagine. Trying to remember to say thanks. Planting and making relationships and joining things. Multiplying. Praying like mad for the strength and energy to do what needs to be done, and being community for one another in the in-between time, the time when we don't know much except that we need home and don't want to face the times alone. This weekend in our worship and gathering with United Church of Christ congregations from all over the state, we sang this song from Ghana that can be a little bit of an earworm. The refrain is a single word, woyaya, which means we are going. The verses are these. We are going. Heaven knows where we are going. We'll know we're there. We will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We will know. We know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will. And woyaya, woyaya, woyaya is the refrain. We are going. We are going. We will get there together. The only home field advantage that we need is this thing that we read in Scripture. The earth is God's and everything in it. Somehow all will be well. We are Woodside. Be whole, be well, be home. Amen.
Join me in the statement of faith. We believe in God. God loves all people. God is with us in life and death and life beyond death.
We are not alone. We believe in the teachings of Jesus and exemplify his life. We believe the church is the faith of his people.
It is responsibility of our church to promote within each individual the Spirit of God and the teachings of Jesus. The church has a responsibility to the community, and our faith is our pattern for action.
We believe worship is expressed in many forms, in prayer, music, and meditation.
Spiritual development is a never-ending process.
We believe in the dignity and uniqueness of each individual. All individuals have the right to their own interpretation of religious faith.
By coming together in Christian fellowship, We renew our spiritual energy. Our faith is demonstrated by a dynamic, I think I said that right, dynamic response to changing times.
We are an open, welcoming, affirming congregation, accepting into the full life and ministry of our church all persons,
including those of every race, culture, age, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, ability, and economic circumstance.
and with side, our diversity strengthens our faith. Our actions are a reflection of our Christian faith.
Today we celebrate life with the Creator, who suffers and rejoices with us. Let us offer our prayer to God, responding, Creator of all living things, receive our prayer. For all the people in the world who are living today in circumstances both good and horrific, we ask that your presence be felt and known, and that the hope that surpasses understanding shine through. In faith and hope, we acknowledge you.
Creator of all things, receive our prayer.
For those entrusted to govern, we ask that your passion for the world would move them toward doing what is right, especially for the oppressed, the disenfranchised, and those experiencing poverty. Humble the powerful and transform agendas. In need of change, we desire you.
Creator of all things, receive our prayer.
For the natural world around us, desecrated by inventions that have harmed all living things, we ask for the resolve to change the way we live so that the bees, wildlife, earth, and atmosphere can thrive. Help us to live intentionally inconvenient lives for the sake of future generations. In thoughtful consumption, we honor you. For those wrestling with difficult circumstances, we ask for your healing touch, tangible help, and a seismic shift in our outlook and condition. We lift their lives to you, believing you know all they need.
For Leah.
The Beelan family. Bobby DeVore.
Kathleen Bennett and Michelle Wicker,
Peggy Upchurch.
Mark Toby,
In faith and doubt, we trust you.
Creator of all living things, receive our prayer.
For love and hope and new beginnings, we offer our praise and thanksgiving. We know people in our lives with much to celebrate, much for which to be thankful. We celebrate the joys of family and friends and lift their lives to you now in gratitude.
good morning, Williams family.
For Jamie, Gabriel, Earl, and Mark, and the grace they are in our lives. For Karen, Lindy, Jason, Cliff, Pam, and the ways that we can be graced in their lives.
In praise and celebration, we thank you. God of all, we offer you these prayers, believing that you care about what we care about. Give us faith to believe that you are you, and that we are still your beloved people. Let us present with joy the offerings.
Let's stand and sing together. As the grains of wheat once scattered on the hill, gathered into one to become our bread, so may all your people from all the ends of earth, gathered into one in you. As this cup of blessing shared within our midst, as the grains of wheat once scattered on the hill, gathered into one to become our bread, so may all your people from all the ends of earth be gathered into one in you. Let this be a foretaste of as the grains of wheat once scattered on the hill, into one to become our bread. So may all your people from all the ends of earth be gathered into one in you.
All good gifts around us come from you, God.
God be with you. And also with you. Let us offer our prayers of thanksgiving for this meal. God, you moved over the waters and created order from chaos. You dreamed of community and made a world sufficient for all. You rescued your people from slavery and walked with them through the desert, accompanying them as a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. You gave them dreams and visions of a new way of living, a way of sharing the bounty of the earth with all its people, all your people. And Jesus, you tried one more time to show us a way that is better than what we can imagine. And when he threatened the status quo, we killed him to assert our own power. But your power is greater, and you chose not to have his death be the end of the story. So we share this meal. A meal Jesus told his disciples to eat, a meal he said was his way of being with us in the struggle and the quest for a mended world. As he broke bread and poured wine, he shared it with all and said, "Do this." And we do, to remember, but more than that, we do it to live, even if just for a moment, in the wholeness of all that is possible. With this bread and cup today, make us again your holy people. Remind us of what has come before, and that what has come before is nothing compared to what can be. That who we are is a delight to you, and our gifts are valued in this work. Bless now this bread and wine, and through it bless us, your people. Let us bear your light to the world, and be part of your vision of peace. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. These are the gifts of God for the people of God. Come and eat. Christ for you. The body of Christ. Please stand and pray with me. Bread, wine, community, these are your gifts to us, O God. Bless us through these, and through us, bless others. We give you thanks always. Amen. God bless us and keep us. God's face shine on us and be gracious to us. God look upon us with favor and give us peace. Amen.